It was October 12th, 2016, a Wednesday I'll never forget. The air was damp, the streets glistening from an earlier rain. My breath came out in little clouds as I walked down the cracked sidewalk toward the station. It was a walk I knew too well, almost 30 minutes long, always the same stretch of dim streetlights and deserted intersections. Normally, I filled the silence with music or a phone call, but that night my phone battery had died, so it was just me, the dark, and the steady sound of my shoes against the wet pavement. Ashfield Station itself always looked dead at this hour. The paint was peeling, rats scurried along the tracks, and the only light came from buzzing fluorescent bulbs that flickered more than they shone. Most people avoided the 8 o'clock train. It was too late for commuters and too early for night shift workers. But I didn't have a choice. I needed to get home. When the train screeched into the station, it was exactly as I remembered. Old, groaning, with that sour metallic stench of rust and oil. The doors opened with a hiss that felt almost alive, like the train itself was inhaling me. I stepped inside. Empty. Almost. I picked a seat near the middle carriage, dropped my bag beside me, and opened my notebook. I had exams coming up, and if I didn't study now, I'd regret it later. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought she was just another student, a girl sitting 3 rows down, her head bent so that her hair fell forward in long black strands. Her posture was unnaturally still, too still, as if she were frozen in place. I squinted, trying to see what she was looking at. A phone? A book? Her lap? But from where I sat, it looked like she wasn't holding anything at all, just staring down, motionless. Something about that stillness crawled under my skin. You know when your brain screams that something isn't right, but you can't explain why? That's what I felt. I told myself to focus on my notes, to stop being paranoid. But every time my eyes drifted upward, there she was, the same, unmoving, hair like a curtain, face hidden. The more I tried to ignore her, the more impossible it became. The train rattled forward into the night, and the silence pressed against me. I tapped my pen against the page, but even that sound seemed too loud, echoing in the hollow carriage. My ears strained for any other noise, anything to prove I wasn't trapped in this metal box alone with her. But all I heard was breathing. Not mine. Hers. Slow, shallow, like someone pretending to breathe normally but failing. I froze, my pen hovering above the paper, my own breath caught in my chest, and for a horrible second I couldn't tell if I was imagining it or not. I dared to glance up again. Her head shifted, just slightly. Not enough for me to see her face, but enough for me to know she was aware of me. A hot rush of panic surged through me. I gripped my notebook tighter, knuckles white, and buried my eyes into the page, pretending to write, pretending to study, anything to avoid looking at her again. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she could hear it. And yet some part of me wanted to look, needed to look, to confirm that I wasn't just losing my mind. But I didn't. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't dare. Because in that suffocating silence, in that dim, flickering light, in the middle of an almost empty train, I felt something watching me, not just from the corner where she sat. No, it was everywhere. The windows, the shadows, the very air itself. And I swear to God, the train felt alive. That was the beginning of the nightmare. I remember clutching my notebook so hard that night that my fingers hurt. I told myself not to look at her again, not to acknowledge the strange girl sitting 3 rows down. But the problem was I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew I was watching, that she had been waiting for me. I tried to focus on the equations scribbled on the page, The numbers swam in and out of focus as the train rumbled through the darkness. Every bump on the track made the lights flicker overhead, casting her shape in broken frames, like a film reel that kept skipping. Each time the light came back, she looked like she had moved, though I never saw her actually shift. One second her head was tilted slightly left, the next slightly right. My skin prickled as though unseen hands were brushing against the back of my neck. And then it happened. "Hi." The voice was sudden, clear, and far too close. I jerked my head up. She was no longer 3 rows away. She was right in front of me. I swear on my life, I never saw her stand. I never heard her footsteps on the carriage floor. But now she sat directly opposite me, her knees almost touching mine. "Hi, my name is Jana," she said again. Her voice was soft, almost melodic, but it carried something unnatural, like a lullaby sung in a pitch slightly off key. My mouth went dry. My chest tightened as if someone had wrapped an icy rope around my ribs. For a few seconds, I couldn't speak at all. She just sat there, smiling, waiting, staring at me with eyes that didn't belong to a human. I can't describe those eyes properly. They weren't just black. They were bottomless, as though they could swallow the weak light of the carriage and reflect nothing back. Her face was pale, too pale, almost like wax, and her smile. God, that smile! Wide, too wide, stretching across her face like her skin had forgotten its limits. Somehow I forced myself to answer. I'm Ted." Her grin deepened and she leaned forward slightly as though I'd passed some sort of test. "Ted," she repeated, tasting the name, dragging it out longer than necessary. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but she didn't blink. She didn't even shift her gaze. And there's something terrifying about a person who never blinks. "What do you study?" she asked, suddenly, tilting her head, still smiling. I told her, mechanical engineering. My voice shook. "That's nice," she whispered, her lips stretching wider. "You must be very clever." I nodded, trying to act normal, though I felt anything but. She asked about my classes, my professors, my schedule. Her questions were strangely ordinary, but her tone was all wrong. It was as if she had memorized the rhythm of human conversation without understanding it. Every time she laughed, it came a fraction too late, like she was rehearsing a script. I kept my answers short, praying she'd lose interest, but she didn't. Instead, she leaned even closer, her black eyes gleaming in the weak light. "Isn't it strange, Ted, how empty this train is tonight?" Her words sent a jolt through me. I hadn't told her my name again. I hadn't given her permission to use it like that. I guess so," I muttered. "Don't you know? Haven't you heard the stories?" My throat tightened. "Stories?" Her smile widened until it nearly split her face. "About this train, about how people go missing here. They board at night, like you did, and then they never get home." I forced a shaky laugh, but it died in my throat. Her expression didn't change. "I always avoided this train, but tonight I had no choice. Tonight, I had to be here." I didn't know what to say. My notebook was still in my lap, but my hands had gone numb. The pen slipped from my fingers and rolled across the floor. Neither of us moved to pick it up. Her head tilted again, unnaturally far this time, like her neck had no bones to stop it.
She watched me with those endless black eyes, her smile frozen. And in that moment, I realized something that made my blood run cold. This wasn't just a girl. This wasn't a coincidence. She was here for me. And for the first time that night, I knew deep in my gut I should never have gotten on that train.
After Jaina whispered about people going missing on the train, I tried to laugh it off. But it wasn't the kind of laugh you hear at a joke. It was the desperate, strangled sound of someone trying to convince themselves they're not in danger. My throat was dry, and the air felt thick, like the oxygen itself had curdled. "What do you mean, missing?" I asked, though part of me didn't want to hear the answer. Her grin didn't falter. If anything, it widened, teeth too sharp-looking in the pale overhead light. "Everyone on campus knows," she said softly, like she was sharing a secret. "Students take this train. They're seen boarding, but when the train stops at the final station, no one gets off. No one ever sees them again." I tried to convince myself she was just messing with me, some twisted prank, but the way she spoke, it wasn't playful. It was matter-of-fact. I swallowed hard, forcing a shaky smile. "That's just a rumor. Ghost stories. People make things up." Her head tilted, that unnatural bend again, her hair spilling like black ink over her shoulder. "Do they?" Silence followed, so heavy it made my ears ring. That's when she stopped smiling. Her face went blank, utterly expressionless, as she turned her head sharply to the side, staring at the window. Her voice dropped to a whisper so quiet I almost didn't hear it. "Shh. Do you hear it?" My blood froze. "Hear what?" I stammered. She didn't look at me. Her black eyes stayed locked on the darkness outside the window. The sound, the cracking. I held my breath and listened. At first, there was only the rumble of the train wheels. Then, faintly, so faintly I thought I imagined it, I heard it. A dragging sound, like fingernails scraping down a chalkboard, only stretched out, metallic, echoing. It came from the outside of the carriage, moving alongside us as the train sped forward. I pressed my hands flat against the seat, trying to ground myself, not to panic. "I don't hear anything," I lied. Her head turned slowly, unnaturally, until her face was angled back toward mine. That wide grin slid back across her pale skin, though her lips didn't quite move right, like her face was being pulled into a smile against its will. "Oh, but I do," she whispered. "They're outside, watching, hungry." I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was collapsing in on itself. I forced my gaze toward the window, though every cell in my body screamed at me not to. The tunnel walls rushed past in stuttering flashes of light and shadow. At first, I saw nothing, just the blur of concrete and darkness. And then, there it was. A face. White, eyeless, its mouth stretched into an open scream, pressed against the glass from the outside, keeping pace with the speeding train. I recoiled so hard my notebook slid off my lap and hit the floor. My breath came in shallow gasps. "Jesus Christ!" I shouted. But when I blinked, it was gone. Just the reflection of my own pale, terrified face staring back. Jaina never flinched. She just watched me, eyes glimmering, smile fixed. Once you notice them, they never leave you alone. The scraping sound grew louder. Not just on one side anymore, now it was on both, like dozens of hands clawing along the length of the carriage. The lights flickered again, plunging us into half-darkness. My pulse hammered in my ears. I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. Just the endless train, the endless tunnel, and the impossible sound of something outside trying to get in. And the worst part? In those brief flashes of darkness, I thought I saw more than faces. I thought I saw entire bodies clinging to the sides of the train, pale, twisted figures dragging themselves along the windows, their mouths open in soundless laughter, their fingers leaving streaks on the glass. I shut my eyes, clamped my hands over my ears, and prayed I was imagining it. But the scratching never stopped. And Jaina just sat there, smiling, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. I should have gotten off. I should have pulled the emergency lever, forced open the doors, and run into the tunnel no matter how dark it was. Anything would have been safer than staying on that train. But fear does strange things. It paralyzes you, convinces you that stillness is safer than action. And so I stayed seated, trembling, while the nightmare deepened. The scraping sound along the outside of the carriage grew sharper, louder, like claws raking over steel. Sometimes it would stop suddenly, leaving only silence, which was somehow worse, because I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting. Then the train plunged into a tunnel. The windows went black instantly, swallowing what little light was left. The weak fluorescent bulbs overhead buzzed and flickered, bathing everything in a sickly, stuttering glow. Shadows stretched and twisted across the carriage walls. And then I saw them. At first, just faint outlines in the reflection of the glass, shapes pressed against the window from the outside. But they weren't reflections. They were faces. Pale, gaunt faces, some with hollow sockets where eyes should have been, others with mouths stretched impossibly wide, teeth bared in silent screams. They clung to the train like insects, pressed so hard against the glass I thought it would crack. Their heads turned in unison, following me, watching me. I gasped and stumbled back in my seat, my chest heaving. When I blinked, the window showed only my reflection again, but I knew what I'd seen. Jenna hadn't moved. She just sat there, across from me, smiling. "They like you, Ted," she whispered. "They can smell you." My voice cracked. "Smell me?" Her smile widened. "They can smell fear. Once they know your scent, you can't hide. You're already theirs." The scraping grew louder, closer. It wasn't just outside anymore. I swear to God I heard it coming from the roof above, from the floor below, even from the seams of the carriage doors. And then the voices started. Whispers at first, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, overlapping, impossible to understand but impossible to ignore. They slithered into my ears, coiling in my brain, echoing like a broken radio. Some were crying, some were laughing, some were chanting words I didn't recognize. I covered my ears with my hands, but the whispers didn't stop. They weren't in the air anymore, they were inside me. The lights above flickered violently and then died completely. I was swallowed by blackness. For a moment, the only sound was my ragged breathing. Then something brushed against my arm. Cold, wet fingers. I screamed and jerked away, but there was nothing beside me, only empty space. Or at least it should have been empty. In the dark, I could feel them, a presence pressing in from every side, dozens of bodies crammed into the carriage with me. I swear I could feel their breath on my neck, their weight shifting against the floor, their whispers bleeding into my skull. I clawed at my seat, trying to anchor myself, trying not to lose my mind. And then, light. But it wasn't the carriage lights. It was dim, flickering, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once, enough to show me what was in the darkness.
They were real. Figures filled the carriage, pale, twisted things with sunken eyes and stretched grins, their limbs too long, their movements jerky and unnatural, like puppets tugged by broken strings. They surrounded me, leaning close, their whispers a chorus of madness. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I turned toward Jana, desperate for some explanation, some shred of sanity. But she wasn't Jana anymore. Her pale skin had begun to peel, flaking away in strips, revealing something black and rotted underneath. Her hair hung in clumps, dripping dark liquid onto the floor. And her smile was still there, wider than ever, splitting her face almost to the ears. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Endless pits of darkness. "You see them now," she whispered, her voice echoing with something inhuman. "There's no going back." The figures pressed closer, their whispers rising into shrieks, their hands reaching out. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The train thundered forward through the tunnel, faster and faster, like it was carrying me straight into hell. And in that moment, I realized something terrible. This wasn't a train anymore. It was a trap, and I was never meant to get off.
When the lights flickered back on, the train was no longer the train I had boarded. Everything looked old, decayed. The once blue seats were torn and stained with something dark. The walls were covered in rust, grime, and long black streaks that looked too much like dried blood. Cobwebs hung thick from the ceiling, swaying as the carriage rattled forward. It was like I had been thrown backward in time, or forward into something rotten and dead. And Jana, God, Jana, she wasn't pretending anymore. Her disguise was gone. Her face was collapsing in on itself, flesh gray and sagging, teeth too sharp, eyes glowing faintly like coals in the dark. Her hair dripped in clumps, as though she had just crawled out of some black pit of water. And that smile, always that smile, stretched impossibly wide. "You shouldn't have taken this train, Ted," she said. Her voice no longer sounded human. It was layered, distorted, like dozens of voices speaking through one mouth. No one ever goes home. I bolted up from my seat. I didn't care anymore if I looked insane. I staggered down the aisle and forced open the door to the next carriage. I wish I hadn't. The next carriage was full. Not empty, not quiet like before, full of passengers. But they weren't alive. They sat in perfect rows, their heads tilted at unnatural angles. Their skin was as pale as candle wax, lips blue, eyes black and bottomless, just like Jana's. Some of them had gaping wounds across their throats or chests, wounds that should have killed them, but they just stared blankly forward. And then, at once, every single head turned toward me. Dozens of black eyes locked on mine, and they smiled. My legs nearly gave out. I staggered backward, slamming into the doorframe. The whispers returned, louder now, spilling out of every mouth in the carriage. I couldn't make out words, only the collective sound of despair, laughter, and hunger. I screamed and turned to run, but the door behind me slammed shut on its own, locking me inside. The train slowed suddenly, screeching along the tracks. My heart pounded as I realized we were stopping. Through the window, I saw a platform, but this wasn't any station I knew. The sign above flickered with broken lights, and I couldn't read the name. It was just shifting shapes, letters that rearranged themselves each time I blinked. The platform itself was deserted, lit by sickly yellow lamps that buzzed like insects. The air outside looked wrong, heavy, as if it wasn't meant to be breathed.
The doors opened with a groan. None of the passengers moved. They just kept staring at me, smiling, waiting. And then I felt it. A hand, cold, bony, pressing down on my shoulder. Jana's voice whispered right into my ear, her breath colder than ice. End of the line. I froze. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to run, to jump, to fight, but my body was no longer mine. Slowly, against my will, I turned my head. Jana stood beside me, taller now, her form shifting, bones cracking as her body stretched into something inhuman. Her jaw unhinged, splitting wider than any human mouth could, a pit of endless blackness. The whispers in the carriage grew to a deafening roar. Every passenger rose in unison, their mouths opening wide, their black eyes burning. The platform outside seemed to pulse, alive, as shadows crawled across it like liquid. I knew then, this wasn't a train. It was never a train. It was a vessel, a trap, a one-way passage into something far darker than death. And I was its next passenger. The last thing I saw as I was dragged forward, my heels scraping uselessly against the floor, was the world outside the train, the station, the shadows waiting, and Jana's face, smiling, always smiling, right before the darkness swallowed me whole. If anyone reads this, please don't take the 8 o'clock train. Don't even go near Ashfield Station. Burn this page if you have to. Forget my name. Forget this story. Because if you remember it, if you think too much about it, maybe they'll smell you too. And once they know your scent, they'll never let you go.